Welcome to the Itihas channel. We talk about Pandu and what he did in the Shatashringa after he killed the Rishi Kindama and got the curse of the Rishi that he would never be able to have the pleasure of his wives ever in his life. And the day he does that, he would die immediately. And the wife with whom he'd spent those last few minutes would then follow him to his heavens, to the heavens. We'll discuss what the heavens are sometime later. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Guruve Namaha, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Amme Narayana Namaha, Om Anjaneyaya Namaha. Pandu and his two wives entered the beautiful plains of the Shatashringa, nestled between the mountains. It was paradise on earth. There were meandering streams, there were beautiful trees, there were beautiful meadows, extremely gorgeous plants, springs, hot springs, warm springs, cold springs, rivers, you name it, everything was there. There were areas which were out of bounds for human beings, where Gandharvas used to come with their wives and with their families to spend time on earth. It was absolutely heaven on earth. Animals that could never be seen on the plains, and some animals which would. Birds of different colors and bees. And it was into this land of the birds and bees that Pandu went with his wives, not being able to enjoy the birds and the bees. Pandu walked into this beautiful honeymoon destination with Kunti and Madri, his two wives. Pandu hit the ground running. He knew what he was there for. He was there to lead the life of an ascetic. He was there to lead the life of celibacy, to lead the life of a sannyasin. Vairagya was something he had to achieve and attain, and he decided he will do it at any cost. Pandu was a very brave man, a gallant warrior. Pandu was enigmatic in victory, pragmatic in defeat. And here the only thing he needed to conquer was himself. And he set about it with utmost devotion, with single-mindedness, and a spirit that could not be achieved in normal human beings. He mingled among the rishis, learned from them, discussed with them, spoke to them, learned the Vedas, learned the different forms of knowledge that existed in those times. And trust me, we always think we are in the era of knowledge. There was knowledge existent in those days which is probably far greater than what we have today. And through the course of the Mahabharata, when we discuss the various stories, you will realize that there were things that happened there, things that used to be done there, knowledge that existed there, which you wouldn't see even today, in today's time, which would seem like magic. Which is why a lot of the stories of the Mahabharata are termed as boons, gifts, curses. No, they're not. They were actually scientific, which in an age when we do not understand it, we say it's a curse, it's a boon, it's something. But there was a lot of science in those days, and Pandu got down to understanding it. He was a true sannyasin. He was extremely straightforward in his dealings. He never told a lie. He treated everyone with respect. He never got bitter that he was cursed. He was always pleasant with his wives and with the rishis around. And even though that one aspect of intercourse was absent in his life, those were the best of times he and his wife ever had. And every time Kunti would look back into those times, she would know that there was never a time, even in the palace, that she enjoyed it more than what she enjoyed in Shatashringa. It was truly paradise on earth. And Pandu became an ascetic and a sannyasin of excellent proportions. He developed very strong ascetic powers. that could only be done with intense tapasya. And this tapasya that he did, the penance that he did, gave him almost a status of a Brahma Rishi, which is very difficult to achieve for a normal human being. But he achieved a status akin to a Brahma Rishi. One day when he was with the rishis, there were a large group of rishis moving north. He paid his respects to them and asked them, where are you all headed? And they told him that they were going to Brahma Loka to meet the Swayambhu himself, the Swayambhu who created himself and probably created the world. Though the Rig Veda clearly says that we really don't know who created what, whether it really was created by one man, whether it was created by one particle, whether it was created from nothing, nobody really knows. Even the gods above, who seem to know everything, even they don't really know. But still, these rishis were going to the palace of Brahma, who was a great being in those days, a Swayambhu, and they were going to Brahma Loka. So Pandu said, take me with you, take me and my wives with you. We want to come there. And the rishis gasped and said, no, the journey is difficult. It's very difficult. You're not going to make it. We passed through hundreds of hills. We passed through meadows and gardens where Gandharvas rule, where it's difficult to set foot. You need to take permission and they might refuse. And if they do refuse, you have to take a circuitous route around those gardens. There will be a lot of hardships, a lot of sorrows. And those beautiful princesses will not be able to take this route, Pandu. Don't come. And Pandu argued, as he always does. Yes, Pandu had this problem that he would always argue. So Pandu argued, a man achieves success in 4 things. One is to the devas, by doing dhyana to them, by giving them offerings. To the rishis, by doing dhyana, tapasya, and giving them offerings. To his fellow human beings, by being good to them and treating them well. And to his pitras, or his ancestors, by ensuring that he has children who do the tarpana necessary to give them salvation, absolution. I have achieved most of the things. I pray to the devas and I've done my work for my fellow human beings and the rishis. And the only thing I have remaining is my pitras. And that I cannot have because I cannot have children. And if I cannot have children, what is this use for me living in this earth? Let me come with you. If we do not make it, so be it. I have accepted it. For me, there is no pitra seva that is possible because I personally cannot have children. So let me come with you to see the great Swayambhu Brahma himself, to be in his court, to see the beauty that very few people in this world have ever had the luxury of seeing. And the Rishi said, no, Pandu, that's not your life. You know, we see the future. We see 5 Devaputras who are there with you. We see a war that is going to happen in the future, a war between Dharma and Adharma. And your sons are going to take the side of Dharma, fight against Adharma, and make you famous. They're going to make your name remembered for as long as the sun and the moon and the stars are there and as long as the earth is there. No, Pandu, your life doesn't end here. Your future is not going to Brahmaloka. Your future is here on earth. Your future is here to beget children. And these children are going to take the form of Dharma and be on the side of Dharma and keep your name alive. No, Pandu, don't come with us. Go back to your queens. And Pandu said, how can I do it? I have been cursed. And the Rishi said, there will be a way. If it is deemed to happen, there will be a way. Use your free will. Use your free will to achieve fate. They are not exclusive of each other. Fate and free will, destiny and free will are not exclusive of each other. You can use your free will to achieve your destiny. Do that, O Pandu, do that. So Pandu was excited. He ran to his wives and he said, "This is a discussion I need to have." And he saw both Kunti and Madri looking lovingly at him, and he decided at that very instant that this discussion is not happening with Madri, it's happening with Kunti. See, Pandu was a very astute man. Why? An astute man knows his wife very well, or wives very well in some cases, as in Pandu's. But an astute man knows his wife very well and knows them inside out. And part of that astuteness is not reacting to everything that happens with his wife. And this art was perfected by Pandu. So you have to imagine, Pandu's in the middle of Shatashringa. He doesn't have a war to go to. He doesn't have a 9 to 5 job he has to go to. He doesn't have a palace to do his duties in. He has his rishis, he has his tapasya, and he has his wives. That's just about it. And a man who can live for so many years happy, closeted with his wives, 2 of them, obviously is extremely astute. So knowing both of them, he knew Madri was a childlike, happy soul, totally in love with him. And whatever Pandu would say, she would just say yes and agree to it. But Kunti, on the other hand, was a smart woman. She was a very calculating woman, and she was a very intelligent woman, a woman who could use her intellect to dissect what is right and what is wrong. And right now, Pandu wanted to bounce ideas off Kunti. Pandu wanted to actually know whether the decision he is going to take would be the right decision or not. And Pandu was himself not sure what the course of history would be for him. And so he needed someone, not a yes man or a yes woman like Madri, but a critical person like Kunti, who could be his conscience and who would play the devil's advocate to discuss this matter with. And so Pandu chose Kunti for this discussion. This discussion itself is a wonderful exposition that every law student should read. Of course, it's very extensive and probably beyond the scope of this talk. But I will give you a few stories of this discussion which are relevant and which would have a bearing on the future course of events. Pandu in his discussions would quote precedents, would talk about older cases, similar cases, would quote the impact of Dharma on those cases, and give his argument as to why he should have children, obviously. Kunti, through this discussion, would go against what Pandu says a lot of times, would counter him bravely, because, there is this feeling that the wife should not question the husband. No, Kunti wasn't that type. Kunti would argue with him. Kunti would take him on. Kunti would bring out counter arguments. Kunti would say that, what you're saying may be Dharma at that time, but it's not Dharma for this time, because Dharma changes. The concept of Dharma changes. What you are going to see through the Mahabharata may not suit your concept of righteousness today. It may not suit your concept of Dharma today. But it was Dharma then, and it was good in law then. It was not bad in law then. So if it was good in law then, it worked then. So we have to accept what was done then in the context of Dharma of the time then. And Kunti used these arguments very effectively. Another aspect of this set of arguments that they had was they never got angry during these arguments. They never got irritated with each other. And however strongly the opposing party would present a case, the other person wouldn't get irritated, wouldn't lose his temper, his or her temper. On the other hand, through this set of arguments, Pandu would always refer to Kunti with the most beautiful terms. He would call her Kunti of the sweetest smile, Kunti of the kindest, Kunti the kindest person he knew, Kunti of the lotus eyes, Kunti of the beautifully swaying hips, Kunti of the tapered legs, and Kunti of the softest thighs. Yeah, it went from being gentle to being a little more than PG-13. But yes, he did refer to her as these, and Kunti, on the other hand, would refer to Pandu as Pandu of the lotus eyes, Mahabaho, the man with the huge arms, brave Pandu, or bull among men, and all great attributes that Pandu was definitely deserving of. And such was the argument that it was something beautiful to have watched or even to recount. And every student of law should go through that. But I will stick to one or two of the arguments that happen. So basically, the concept of the argument was that Pandu had made very clear that he can't bear children because he cannot have a moment of tenderness with his wife. He cannot indulge in intercourse with her. And if he were to do that, he would drop down dead. And shortly afterwards, his wife would die too. So that was out of the question. So the next best thing would be that if what Kunti should probably do is to have this child with somebody else, with the blessings of Pandu. And when Kunti heard it, she was flabbergasted. She couldn't imagine herself with any other man. Pandu was her life. She could just not imagine, even think of herself going to another man, even if it's to have a child under the command of Pandu, under the orders of Pandu. She couldn't just get herself to do it, and she was shocked. And Pandu then started the slow process of explaining to her that it is probably not always wrong. He explained that children can be had in 12 different circumstances. Obviously, I'm not going to go into all the details of all the 12, but it involved one with himself, and if it was not possible with the husband, it should be done with the brother who is pure of heart. If that was not possible, it should be done with the rishi of a good calling. And there were 12 such examples of how women can beget children. Obviously, Kunti gave a lot of arguments against it. And then Pandu spoke of different instances in the past where the kings would have died, or the kings would have been incapable of having children, and it would be necessary to have an heir to the throne to protect the throne, where the king would then have to find somebody who was worthy, just like himself, to ensure that the race progresses on. And it has been happening since the time of Bharata also. We'll come to that story a little later. And through all these arguments, Pandu insisted that Kunti should think about having a child either with a rishi, like it was done in the case of his parents. Pandu himself was the child of Krishna Dvaipayana, Vedavyasa, after his father Vichitravirya died. We'll come to that story a little later. And Pandu gave this example to tell that his grandmother Satyavati brought in her son Krishna Dvaipayana or Vedavyasa to have children to continue the Kuru clan. And Pandu was such a product of that intimate encounter. And there was nothing wrong in it. It was a much higher Varna, which was in play here, a rishi of immense standing who compiled the Vedas, which is why he was called Vedavyasa. And being Krishna Dvaipayana's son, Pandu himself was no mean man. He was a great warrior, an enigmatic warrior, and now almost like a Brahma Rishi. So there was a precedent of Pandu who was begotten by Vedavyasa. So there was nothing wrong if Kunti were to go to a rishi to have a child. But Kunti was having none of it. And then Kunti told him, you have been doing a lot of great achieving ascetic powers and doing a lot of ascetic practices in the forest here. You've been in contact with rishis. You have got immense power. Why do you not use it? He said, in what way? And then Kunti told him about the story of Vyushitasva. Vyushitasva was also an ancestor of Pandu, a great king of the Kuru clan. He was an extremely great warrior, a great prince, an extremely handsome and powerful man. He had done a lot of favors for the Devas, and Indra himself had come for, for his Ashwamedha sacrifice. He had invited the Brahmanas and the rishis of all around Bharatvarsha for his Ashwamedha sacrifice. He let the Ashwamedha horses go in all four directions, north, south, east, west, conquered all the kings of Bharatvarsha, and created a huge empire. And Vyushitasva was able to achieve immense power. He was blessed by Indra himself. He used to extract somarasa, which is a kind of nectar, using various occult practices. And using this somarasa, he had the devas drinking out of his pot, if I may say. Such was his greatness. He was accompanied by his beautiful wife Bhadra, whom he loved immensely. And they were inseparable. Even when Vyushitasva used to go for the wars, he used to take Bhadra with him for these wars. But somehow he died before bearing a child. And his wife Bhadra was inconsolable. She didn't know what to do because she never knew a life without her husband. And as she sat next to the corpse, holding its hand, she said, "My dear husband, I will follow you to the other world. I will sit on this kusha grass. I will stop eating and drinking till I will wither away and die and follow and meet you in the other world. I want to be with you, my lovely husband." And at that time, a voice disembodied from the corpse came out and said, "My dear Bhadra, my dear wife, my beloved wife, don't do that. I will give you a child. Using the ascetic powers that I have obtained over the years, I will ensure you have a child. Bathe on the night of your period, wait for 14 days, and on the day of the waxing moon, I will come into you and I will give you a child." You know, the knowledge of fertility, that's quite obvious. But the knowledge of IVF probably existed in those days. And using the semen of this corpse of Vyushitasva, using ascetic powers aided by some rishis, Bhadra was able to get pregnant and bear 7 children. Now, you know that when you do IVF, you do multiple births. You have twins, you have triplets, you have quadruplets, you have more also. This was something very similar far before Kunti and Pandu's time. So the knowledge existed, the science existed. And Kunti said, "It's possible. Use your ascetic powers and the power of the rishis around you and the power that they have to do this for me to get children." And Pandu said, "We can't take the risk of using my semen for it. Because if the curse were to take place, you would also die after that. And I can't have that for you, my beloved Kunti. I can't have that." And Pandu gave another example to counter Kunti's example. Pandu gave the example of this, the institution of marriage. Long before Pandu's time, around the time of a rishi called Uddalaka, there was no concept of marriage. Women were free to take the man they wanted, with their permission, of course, and the men were free to take the women they wanted with the permission of the women, of course. The power always lay in the women's hands to decide whether she wanted to go with the man or not. No man could force himself on a woman, and no man could convince a woman if she wasn't going to be convinced. And such was a time that was existing in the past. where a woman could choose the man she wanted, and it was not forbidden, it was not wrong. She would not be demeaned for having done that. And she had a son, she and Rishi Uddalaka had a son who himself was a great rishi called Shvetaketu. Now, Shvetaketu one day saw one of his father's friends, another Brahmana, hold his mother's hand and grab it and say, "Come with me." And he smiled and went off with him. It hurt him very badly that his mother would go off with another man. Not just that, he blamed the Brahmana for seizing her because somewhere deep inside, he didn't want to blame his mother for going with him. And he was burning in anger, and he went to his father and said, "How could you allow it to happen?" And his father consoled him and calmed him down and said, "No, my son, it's acceptable. It is okay for a woman to choose the man she wants. I have no problem with it. Why should you?" But he was not consoled, and he cursed and laid down a rule that in future a woman has to be married to a man if she has to be with him, if she has to spend the time with him. A woman has to be married to a man, and once she is married to a man, she can spend time with no other man. And she has to follow those rules, and those rules are not changeable. He didn't put the same rule on the men at that time, but he ensured that this rule would be there on all the women on earth or in Bharatvarsha. Of course, the animals and the birds and the bees were exempted from this rule, but this rule was there for all the women henceforth. And Pandu said, there are women in the northern Kuru region who still live the way which was lived before Shvetaketu's uh, curse came into being. And they still have choose the man they want, they go with the man they want, they have children from the man they want, and it's not wrong and it's not looked down upon. So when there's a precedent like that, I think you should agree, you should go with the rishi. And this was when Kunti finally decided to tell a story of her childhood, about how she had a blessing from the sage Durvasa, who granted her a boon that she could use a mantra which he taught her to call on a deva to have a child with her. Of course, Kunti didn't go into the elaborate description of how she got this boon, what she did with it. She was very candid, very cagey about it, obviously. But she just gave Pandu the bare facts and the very minimal facts that she had the ability to summon a deva. She had the ability to call a deva of her choosing, who would then bestow a child upon her. And it was given by the sage Durvasa, so it's perfectly legitimate. On hearing this, Pandu was overjoyed. Pandu couldn't believe his ears. He couldn't imagine that this luck was turning his way finally. And the words of the rishis who were on their way to Brahmaloka to meet the Swayambhu himself were actually true. What they said was absolutely true. He was absolutely thrilled, and he told his wife Kunti, "Waste no time, Kunti. Summon the devas, we will summon them, and we will get the children that we want, that we should have, who will do tarpana for us after we pass away, who will offer pinda for us after we pass away, so that our ancestors and our own souls will attain absolution." And Kunti said, "Okay." So we'll go back to how Kunti got this boon in the first place, what she did with it, and how she went about it. We'll do that in the next chapter. Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.